I always knew Cambria was lying when she chewed her bottom lip. 23 years of marriage teaches you these things, the little tells that give away the game. Tonight, standing in our kitchen at 11:47 p.m., she was practically gnawing through it. The conference ran late, she said, setting down her designer suitcase with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. You know how these HR seminars can be. I nodded from my spot at the kitchen table, laptop open, pretending to review project specs for tomorrow's meeting. The truth was, I'd been sitting here for 3 hours, waiting, planning. The spreadsheet on my screen wasn't about construction timelines. It was about Cambria's lies, and cross-referenced with credit card statements and hotel receipts I'd been collecting for months. Must have been some seminar, I said, not looking up, especially considering it ended 2 days ago. Her hand froze on the suitcase handle. In the harsh fluorescent light, I could see the exhaustion in her face, the guilt she wore like cheap perfume. She'd always been beautiful, sharp cheekbones, auburn hair that caught light like copper wire, eyes the color of winter storms. But tonight, she looked like someone who'd been living a lie for so long she'd forgotten what truth felt like. What's that supposed to mean? Her voice had that edge it got when she felt cornered at work, the tone she used to dress down employees who challenged her authority. I closed the laptop and looked at her directly for the first time since she'd walked in. It means I know about Brent Marrow. The color drained from her face faster than water down a broken drain. She tried to recover, straightening her shoulders in that power pose she'd learned from some leadership workshop, but it was too late. I'd seen the moment of panic, the instant when her carefully constructed world started crumbling. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. I stood up, walked to the counter, and poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd kept warm all evening. My hands were steady, steadier than they'd been in months. Brent Marrow, consultant from Portland, married to Arden, father of 2, drives a blue BMW with a dent in the rear bumper from where he backed into a fire hydrant outside the Marriott last month. Cambria's breathing had gone shallow. She was still standing by her suitcase like it might offer some kind of protection, or maybe escape. Orion, you're being paranoid. Am I? I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. 3 taps brought up the photo gallery I'd been building for the past 6 weeks. This is you and Brent at Romano's on 5th Street. Tuesday, March 15th. You told me you were at a team-building dinner with your staff. I swiped to the next photo. This is you 2 checking into the Harbor View Inn, same night, room 207, if you're curious. Another swipe. And this is my personal favorite. You 2 in the hotel bar at 1 a.m., his hand on your thigh, your wedding ring sitting on the table next to your martini glass. She was shaking now, but I wasn't done. Not even close. Want to know the really interesting part, Cambria? Brent's wife Arden has been getting the same photos. Funny thing about cheaters, they never think about the other spouse, do they? You're insane. But her voice cracked on the words. Maybe, but I'm thorough. I set the phone down and leaned against the counter, studying her face. See, when your wife starts taking mysterious business trips every other weekend, a smart husband pays attention. When she starts buying new lingerie and hiding it in the guest room closet, he gets curious. And when she starts getting text messages at 2 a.m. from someone named Conference Coordinator who uses way too many heart emojis for professional communication, well, I shrugged, took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, but not as bitter as the taste this conversation was leaving in my mouth. That's when a smart husband starts making calls. Turns out your HR department has very detailed records about which conferences they approve for travel reimbursement. Amazing how none of your recent trips match up with actual events. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Cambria finally moved, abandoning her suitcase to pace toward the living room. She was thinking, calculating. I could practically see the gears turning as she tried to figure out how much I knew, how much damage control she could still manage. Okay, she said finally, turning to face me. Maybe I've been seeing someone, but that doesn't give you the right to spy on me like some kind of stalker. The audacity was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed, she was trying to make me the villain. It was so perfectly Cambria that I almost laughed. Spy? I set down my coffee cup. Honey, I didn't have to spy. You left a trail wider than Interstate 95, hotel receipts in your car, restaurant charges on our joint credit card, photos all over social media from places you claim to be working. You even used our shared cloud storage to back up pictures from your little romantic getaways. Her face went white again, but this time anger was creeping in around the edges. You went through my private files? Private? Now I did laugh, but there was no humor in it. They're on our shared account, Cambria, the one we set up for family photos and important documents. Remember? You insisted on it for transparency in our marriage. I walked over to where she stood, close enough to smell the unfamiliar soap she'd used in whatever hotel room she'd been sharing with Brent, close enough to see the mascara smudged under her eyes and the guilt written in every line of her face. But here's the thing that really gets me, I said, keeping my voice level and calm. It's not just the cheating, it's the lying, the elaborate stories, the fake conferences and imaginary coworkers and fictional emergencies that required you to extend your trips. You turned our marriage into a creative writing exercise. Orion, please. We can work through this. People make mistakes. Mistakes? I stepped back, shaking my head. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is double booking dinner plans. What you've been doing for the past 8 months isn't a mistake. It's a choice. A series of choices, all designed to make me look like a fool while you lived your secret life. She tried a different approach, softening her voice, letting tears gather in her eyes. It was a technique I'd seen her use at work, the strategic vulnerability that made people want to protect her. I never meant for it to happen. Brent and I, we just connected. Sometimes people grow apart, and they find something they didn't know they were missing. Save it for someone who hasn't watched you practice that speech in the bathroom mirror. I walked back to the table and opened my laptop again. Besides, you're about 3 months too late for the remorse routine. What do you mean? I turned the screen toward her. The spreadsheet was color-coded, cross-referenced, and comprehensive. Dates, times, locations, expenses, lies told, and evidence gathered. At the bottom was a summary that would have made my project management professor proud. I've been planning for this conversation since January. See, the thing about being married to someone in HR is that you learn a lot about documentation, about building cases, about the importance of having your facts straight before you make accusations. Cambria stared at the screen, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. Shock, fear, anger, calculation. You've been planning this for months? Planning, investigating, preparing. Did you know Brent's been cheating on Arden for years? You're not his first affair, Cambria. You're just his most recent one. His wife has been collecting evidence too, building her own case for when she finally decides to leave him. I closed the laptop again and looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, standing in the wreckage of her secret life. Arden and I have been comparing notes. The shipwreck wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to find two betrayed spouses plotting revenge, but it had 3 things going for it: strong coffee, weak cell service, and a clientele that minded their own business. I'd been meeting Brent Marrow here twice a week for the past month, and so far nobody had asked questions. She was already waiting in our usual booth when I arrived, laptop open, papers spread across the scarred wooden table like battle plans. Arden was nothing like I'd expected when I first called her 6 weeks ago. Where Cambria was all sharp edges and calculated charm, Arden had a quiet intensity that reminded me of a coiled spring. She was pretty in an understated way, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that missed nothing. How did she take it? She asked without looking up from her screen. About as well as you'd expect. I slid into the booth across from her and signaled the waitress for coffee. Denial, then anger, then the waterworks routine. She tried to make it sound like some kind of cosmic love story instead of garden variety cheating. Arden snorted. They always do that. Brent gave me the same speech 2 years ago when I caught him with his secretary. We just connected, Arden. Sometimes people find something they didn't know they were missing. She mimicked his voice with surgical precision. You stayed with him after that? I had 2 kids in middle school and a mortgage I couldn't handle alone. Plus, he swore it was over, promised to go to counseling, the whole routine. She finally looked up at me, and I saw something cold and determined in her expression. But I also started keeping records. Every late night, every suspicious expense, every lie he told me about working weekends. I learned from my mistake. The waitress brought my coffee and refilled Arden's cup without being asked. We'd become regulars here, the kind of customers who tipped well and never caused trouble. If she was curious about why a construction manager and a substitute teacher spent so much time hunched over laptops and legal documents, she kept it to herself. So, what's the next phase? I asked. Arden turned her laptop toward me. The screen showed a detailed timeline of Brent and Cambria's relationship, cross-referenced with financial records, travel expenses, and social media activity. It was more thorough than anything I'd put together, organized with the kind of methodical precision that made my project management skills look amateur. Phase 1 was information gathering, she said, pointing to the first column. Phase 2 was confirmation and documentation. We're entering Phase 3 now, consequences. What kind of consequences? She clicked to a new tab, revealing a folder full of email drafts, legal documents, and what looked like a comprehensive communication plan. The kind that makes sure they both understand exactly what they've thrown away, and exactly what it's going to cost them. I leaned forward, studying the screen. You've been busy. I've had 2 years to think about this, Orion. 2 years of playing the supportive wife while my husband made a fool of me with a string of other women. Cambria might be his latest conquest, but she's not his first, and she won't be his last unless someone stops him. She pulled up another document, a detailed financial analysis that showed how Brent had been using their joint accounts to fund his affairs. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts that never made it home. The numbers were staggering. He spent almost $15,000 on his extracurricular activities in the past year alone, Arden said. Money that should have gone toward our kids' college funds, or the roof repair we've been putting off, or the vacation he keeps promising we'll take someday. I thought about Cambria's new wardrobe, the mysterious charges on our credit card, the way she'd been pushing for us to refinance the house to free up some cash for investments. How much of our money had she spent on her affair with Brent? What about their workplaces? I asked. Cambria's always going on about professional ethics and appropriate workplace behavior. Seems like her company might be interested to know she's been conducting personal business on company time. Arden smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it wasn't a pleasant expression. Funny you should mention that. I've been doing some research on both their employers' policies regarding extramarital affairs, especially when they involve falsified expense reports and misuse of company resources. She opened another folder, this one full of corporate policy documents and email templates. Cambria's company has very strict guidelines about personal relationships affecting professional judgment, and Brent's consulting firm has a morality clause in their contracts that specifically addresses conduct that could damage the company's reputation. You're going to get them both fired? I'm going to give their employers the information they need to make informed decisions about the kind of people they're employing. She leaned back in the booth, her expression matter of fact. What they do with that information is up to them. I had to admire her thoroughness. While I'd been focused on gathering evidence and confronting Cambria, Arden had been thinking 3 moves ahead, considering every angle, planning for every contingency. She'd turned revenge into a science. There's something else, she said, lowering her voice. I've been monitoring Brent's communications, and it looks like your wife isn't his only current affair. That hit me like a punch to the stomach. Bad enough that Cambria had been cheating on me, but the idea that she was just one of multiple women Brent was stringing along made it somehow worse. How many others? At least 2 that I can confirm, maybe more. Arden's voice was clinical, professional, but I could see the anger burning behind her eyes. He's got a whole system worked out. Different phones for different women, separate email accounts, even a fake social media profile he uses to maintain his cover stories. She showed me screenshots of text conversations, social media posts, and email exchanges that painted a picture of a man who'd turned infidelity into a full-time hobby. Brent wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator, targeting women in vulnerable situations and spinning elaborate lies to keep them all believing they were special. Does Cambria know about the others? I doubt it. He's very good at compartmentalization. Each woman thinks she's his one true love, his escape from an unhappy marriage, his chance at a fresh start. Arden's laugh was bitter. The same lines he used on me when we first started dating 15 years ago. I stared at the evidence spread across the table, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about 2 people who'd built their happiness on a foundation of lies and manipulation, who'd hurt multiple families in their selfish pursuit of whatever they thought they deserved. So what's the plan? I asked. Arden closed her laptop and gathered her papers with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Tomorrow is Friday. Brent always works late on Fridays, or at least that's what he tells me. I'm betting he's actually planning to spend the weekend with Cambria at some romantic hideaway, probably charged to our joint credit card. Probably. Instead, he's going to come home to find his belongings packed, his access to our accounts frozen, and a very detailed letter explaining exactly why his marriage is over. She stood up and slung her laptop bag over her shoulder. Your wife is going to find out she's not as special as she thought she was, and Brent is going to discover that actions have consequences. I left money on the table for our coffee and followed her toward the door. Outside, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the parking lot, and the salt air carried the smell of low tide and rotting seaweed. It should have been peaceful, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into something dark and deep. "Arden," I said as she reached her car, "are you sure about this? Once we start down this road, there's no going back." She paused with her hand on the door handle, and for a moment I saw past the careful planning and cold determination to the hurt woman underneath, the wife who'd been betrayed repeatedly, the mother who'd watched her husband prioritize his affairs over his children, the person who'd spent years being made to feel like she wasn't enough. "Orion," she said quietly, "they made their choices. They chose to lie, to cheat, to hurt the people who loved them most. All we're doing is making sure they understand the real cost of those choices." She got in her car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the parking lot with the weight of what we were about to do settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Tomorrow, 2 marriages would officially end. But tonight, I had one more conversation to have with my wife. Cambria was waiting for me when I got home, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and what looked like a prepared speech. She'd changed out of her travel clothes into jeans and a sweater, washed off her makeup, and pulled her hair back in a ponytail. It was her "let's be reasonable adults" look, the one she used when she wanted to control the narrative of a difficult conversation. "We need to talk," she said as I hung up my jacket. "I figured." I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and sat down across from her. "Let me guess. You've had time to think. You realize you made some poor choices, and you want to work on saving our marriage." Her mouth tightened slightly. She'd been planning to lead the conversation, and I'd just stolen her opening. Something like that. And let me guess the rest. It wasn't really an affair, it was an emotional connection that got out of hand. You never meant for it to go as far as it did. You still love me, but we've grown apart, and maybe this is a wake-up call that we need to put more effort into our relationship. The color was rising in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. "You're not making this easy, Orion." "Easy?" I took a long pull from my beer and studied her face. "Cambria, you've been lying to me for 8 months. You've spent thousands of our dollars on hotel rooms and romantic dinners with another man. You've created elaborate fictional scenarios to cover your tracks, involved your coworkers in your deception, and made me question my own sanity when I started noticing inconsistencies in your stories. What part of that should be easy?" "I know I hurt you." "No," I cut her off. "You didn't hurt me. You humiliated me. You made me into a joke. The clueless husband who doesn't know his wife is living a double life. You turned our marriage into a lie and our home into a place where I had to pretend everything was normal while you planned your next romantic getaway." She was crying now, but they were careful tears, the kind that didn't smudge mascara or make her nose red. Professional tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. Things with Brent just happened." "Things just happened," I repeated her words slowly, tasting their inadequacy. 23 years of marriage, and the best explanation you can give me is that things just happened. It's not that simple. Actually, it is that simple. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "You made a choice, Cambria. Not once, but dozens of times. Every lie you told, every fake conference you attended, every night you spent in his bed instead of ours. Those were all choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." She wiped her eyes with a tissue and tried to regain her composure. "What do you want from me, Orion? You want me to grovel? You want me to beg for forgiveness? I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we have to throw away everything we've built together." "Everything we've built?" I gestured around the kitchen, at the house we'd bought 15 years ago, at the life we'd created together. "You already threw it away. I'm just acknowledging reality." "So that's it? You're not even willing to try counseling or separation or anything that might help us work through this?" Thus, I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on the table between us. "Tell me about the others." "What others?" "The other women Brent is seeing. The ones he's been texting while he's been texting you. The ones he takes to different hotels so you won't run into each other in the lobby." Her face went completely still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the screenshots Arden had shared with me. Jennifer from his office, Melissa from that conference in Chicago, Rebecca from his gym. Should I keep going? Cambria stared at the phone screen, her face cycling through emotions too quickly for me to track them all. Shock, denial, hurt, anger, and finally something that looked like the first stirrings of understanding. "He told me his marriage was over," she whispered. "He said Arden didn't understand him, that they were just staying together for the kids. He told all of them the same thing." I put the phone away and looked at my wife, really looked at her. Maybe for the last time. "You weren't special, Cambria. You weren't his great love or his chance at happiness. You were just convenient." She was shaking now, but I couldn't tell if it was from anger or humiliation or the simple shock of having her fantasy crumble in real time. You're lying. You're just trying to hurt me because I hurt you. I don't need to lie. The truth is doing all the work. I stood up and walked to the counter, putting some distance between us. Arden's been documenting his affairs for 2 years. She's got records of his expenses, copies of his communications, evidence of at least 6 different women he's been involved with since they've been married. You're not even his longest-running affair. That honor belongs to someone named Patricia who works at his bank. Cambria buried her face in her hands, and for the first time since this whole thing started, her tears seemed genuine. Not strategic, not calculated, just the raw grief of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. I thought he loved me, she said through her fingers. Maybe he did, in his way. But he also loved Jennifer and Melissa and Rebecca and Patricia, and probably half a dozen others I don't know about yet. I felt something that might have been pity stirring in my chest, but I pushed it down. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She looked up at me, mascara finally smudged, nose finally red, looking more human than she had in months. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice to make. You can keep living in Fantasyland, pretending that what you had with Brent was real and meaningful and worth destroying your marriage over, or you can acknowledge that you got played by a professional liar who saw you coming from a mile away. And if I acknowledge it, then maybe we can have an honest conversation about what happens next. I sat back down across from her, close enough to see the fine lines around her eyes, the gray roots she'd been covering with increasingly frequent salon visits. But it has to be honest, Cambria. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more trying to control the narrative. Just the truth, for once. She nodded slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand. The truth is, I felt invisible, like I'd turned into this middle-aged woman who nobody really saw anymore, and Brent made me feel beautiful and interesting and alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. So you decided to have an affair instead of talking to your husband about feeling invisible. I tried to talk to you. You were always working, or watching TV, or dealing with some crisis at the construction site. When was the last time you really looked at me, Orion? When was the last time you told me I was beautiful, or took me somewhere special, or made me feel like I was more than just the person who handled the household logistics? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. We had fallen into a routine, taken each other for granted, stopped putting effort into the relationship that had once been the center of both our worlds. But that didn't justify what she'd done. So, instead of working on our marriage, you decided to start a new one in secret. It wasn't supposed to be a new marriage. It was supposed to be just something for me, something that made me feel alive again. Something that required you to lie to me every day for 8 months. She was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear and focused. What happens now? Now you pack a bag and go stay with your sister for a while. We both get lawyers and figure out how to divide up 23 years of shared life, and we try to do it with whatever dignity we have left. And Brent? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Brent's about to discover that his wife is a lot smarter and a lot more prepared than he gave her credit for. By this time tomorrow, his comfortable little life is going to be turned upside down. Cambria stood up slowly, like someone much older than her 39 years. Are you going to be okay? The question surprised me. After everything that had happened, she was still worried about my feelings. Maybe there was something left of the woman I'd married all those years ago. I'll be fine, I said. I've got good friends, interesting work, and a house that's finally going to be peaceful again. What about you? She shrugged. I guess I'll figure it out. I always do. She started toward the stairs, then paused and looked back at me. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just that I got caught, but that I hurt you. You deserved better. Yeah, I said. I did. After she went upstairs to pack, I sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of my marriage ending. Drawers opening and closing, hangers scraping against closet rods, the soft thud of items being dropped into suitcases. It should have felt tragic, but mostly it felt like relief. My phone buzzed with a text from Arden. Package delivered. Phase 3 is officially underway. I texted back. Same here. No turning back now. No regrets? I looked around the kitchen, at the empty beer bottle and the tissue box Cambria had left behind, at the house that was about to become mine alone for the first time in over 2 decades. None, I typed. See you Monday for Phase 4. Monday morning brought the kind of crisp October weather that made you glad to be alive, but I barely noticed as I sat in my truck outside Brent's office building, watching the chaos unfold. Arden had been right about her timing. By now, Brent would have discovered that his comfortable life had imploded over the weekend. My phone rang at exactly 8:15. "You need to see this," Arden said without preamble. "Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street, and bring your laptop." The morning grind was busy with the usual crowd of commuters and office workers, but Arden had claimed a corner table away from the main traffic flow. She looked different, lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying a heavy weight that someone had finally lifted from her shoulders. "How did he take it?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "About as well as you'd expect from someone whose entire world just collapsed." She turned her laptop toward me, showing a series of text messages. He came home Friday night to find his belongings packed, his credit cards canceled, and a very detailed letter explaining exactly why his marriage was over. The texts were a masterpiece of panic and desperation, Brent alternating between rage and pleading, demanding explanations and making promises he should have made years ago. But what caught my attention was the timestamp. The messages had continued all weekend, getting increasingly frantic as the reality of his situation sank in. "He's been calling every hour since Friday," Arden continued. "Voicemails, texts, emails, even tried to get the kids to intercede on his behalf, but I've been preparing them for this for months. They're not surprised, and they're not particularly sympathetic." "What about his work?" Her smile was sharp and satisfied. "His supervisor called this morning. Apparently someone sent them a very detailed report about Brent's use of company resources for personal activities, falsified expense reports, inappropriate relationships with clients, misuse of company equipment. He's been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." I had to admire her thoroughness. While I'd been focused on the emotional aspects of Cambria's betrayal, Arden had been systematically dismantling every aspect of Brent's life. It was impressive and slightly terrifying. "What about the other women?" "That's where it gets interesting." She opened a new folder on her laptop, revealing a series of email drafts. "I've been in contact with Jennifer, Melissa, and Rebecca. Turns out they're all as shocked as your wife was to discover they weren't Brent's one true love." She showed me screenshots of conversations with the other women, all expressing similar themes of betrayal and anger. Brent hadn't just been lying to his wife and his lovers. He'd been lying to everyone, creating an elaborate web of deception that was now collapsing in spectacular fashion. Jennifer is considering filing a harassment complaint with HR at his company. Melissa is threatening to tell her husband, who apparently plays poker with some of Brent's biggest clients. And Rebecca? Arden's grin turned predatory. Rebecca works for the local newspaper. She's very interested in writing a story about men who prey on vulnerable women. "You've been busy." "I've had 2 years to plan this, Orion. 2 years of playing the supportive wife while he made a fool of me. I wanted to make sure that when I finally acted, it would be comprehensive." My phone buzzed with a text from Cambria. "We need to talk. Can you meet me for lunch?" I showed the message to Arden, who raised an eyebrow. "Think she's figured out that Brent's not going to be her knight in shining armor?" "Probably. The question is what she wants to do about it." "Are you going to meet her?" I considered it. Part of me was curious to see how Cambria was handling the destruction of her fantasy, but another part of me was done with her drama. "Maybe. Depends on whether she's ready for an honest conversation or if she's still trying to manage the situation." Arden closed her laptop and gathered her things. "Whatever you decide, remember that she made her choices. She doesn't get to control how this ends just because she doesn't like the consequences." After she left, I sat alone with my coffee, thinking about the text from Cambria. 23 years of marriage had taught me to read between the lines of her communications, and this message had the tone of someone who was finally ready to face reality. But it could also be another manipulation, another attempt to control the narrative. I decided to find out which one it was. Romano's was the restaurant where Cambria and Brent had been photographed together, and I wondered if she'd chosen it deliberately or if the irony was accidental. She was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee and the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept much over the weekend. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "You said we needed to talk." She nodded, then seemed to struggle with where to begin. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, setting it on the table between us. "I've been trying to reach Brent since Friday. His phone goes straight to voicemail, his email bounces back, and his office says he's unavailable." And I think I know why." She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "His wife found out, didn't she, about all of it?" "What makes you think that?" "Because you were right about the other women. I did some digging over the weekend, and Brent's been lying to everyone. The story about his marriage being over, the promises about leaving his wife, the whole romantic narrative about us being meant for each other. It was all fabrication." She picked up her coffee cup with shaking hands. "I called Jennifer from his office, pretended to be coordinating a surprise for him. She was very helpful, told me all about their relationship, their plans for the future, how he'd promised to leave his wife for her. How did that make you feel? Like an idiot. Her laugh was bitter and self-aware. Like a middle-aged woman who was so desperate to feel special that she fell for the most obvious lies in the world. The waitress came by to take my order, but I waved her away. This wasn't a social lunch, and I didn't plan to be here long enough to eat. So what do you want, Cambria? I want to know if there's any chance we can fix this. She leaned forward, her voice urgent. I know I hurt you, and I know I broke your trust, but maybe we can find a way to rebuild what we had. What we had was built on the assumption that we were both committed to the same relationship. You spent 8 months proving that assumption was wrong. People make mistakes. Stop calling it a mistake. I kept my voice level, but she flinched anyway. A mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway. What you did was a series of deliberate choices, each one designed to prioritize your feelings over our marriage. She was crying again, but these tears seemed different from the calculated ones she'd used Friday night. These looked like grief, like the genuine sorrow of someone who'd finally understood what they'd thrown away. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she said quietly, but I'm asking for it anyway. Not because I think I've earned it, but because I love you and I want to find a way back to what we had. What we had is gone, Cambria. You can't lie to someone for 8 months and then expect them to trust you again just because you got caught and your affair partner turned out to be a fraud. So that's it? 23 years of marriage and you're just going to walk away? I looked at her across the table. This woman I'd loved and lived with and built a life alongside, and felt something that might have been sadness, not for what we were losing, but for what we'd already lost, without either of us realizing it. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm acknowledging that you already left. 8 months ago, when you decided that whatever you were missing was more important than whatever we had together. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. What happens now? Now we figure out how to untangle 23 years of shared life with whatever dignity we have left. We divide the assets, file the paperwork, and try not to hurt each other any more than we already have. And after that, you figure out who you want to be when you're not living a lie, and I figure out who I am when I'm not married to someone who sees me as an obstacle to her happiness. I stood up and pulled out my wallet, but she waved me away. I've got it. Cambria, I said as I prepared to leave. For what it's worth, I hope you find whatever it was you were looking for. I just hope next time you look for it honestly. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and I walked out of the restaurant where my marriage had effectively ended months before I even knew it was in trouble. Outside, the October air felt clean and sharp, full of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider in months. My phone buzzed with another text from Arden. Brent's been evicted from his apartment. Apparently his wife was the only one on the lease. I texted back, Cambria wants to reconcile. What did you tell her? That some things can't be fixed? Good. Phase 5 starts tomorrow. I didn't ask what Phase 5 involved. I was beginning to understand that Arden's definition of consequences was more comprehensive than I'd initially realized, and part of me was curious to see just how thorough her revenge would be. But mostly, I was ready to stop thinking about Brent and Cambria and their elaborate deceptions. I had my own life to rebuild, my own future to plan. And for the first time in months, that future felt like something worth looking forward to. The call came at 6:30 Tuesday morning, jolting me out of the first decent night's sleep I'd had in weeks. Cambria's sister Lyra was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Orion, thank God you answered. I don't know what to do. Cambria showed up at my apartment last night, completely hysterical, talking about how her life is ruined and everyone hates her. She's been drinking, and she's saying things that don't make any sense. I sat up in bed, running a hand through my hair. What kind of things? She keeps talking about how someone is sabotaging her, how her coworkers are avoiding her, how her boss called her into a meeting yesterday and asked about her expense reports. Orion, what's going on? She said you two are getting divorced, but she won't tell me why. I'd been dreading this conversation. Lyra had always been protective of her younger sister, and she had a tendency to shoot the messenger when the news was bad, but she deserved to know the truth. Lyra, Cambria's been having an affair for the past 8 months. I found out last week, and we're separating. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Lyra spoke, her voice small and shocked. An affair? Cambria? Are you sure? I'm sure. I have photos, hotel receipts, text messages, the whole documentation trail. She's been lying to both of us for months, using fake conferences and imaginary work trips to cover her tracks. Oh my God. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. She kept asking me to cover for her, to confirm stories about family emergencies and weekend visits that never happened, I thought she was planning some kind of surprise for you. The pieces were falling into place. Cambria hadn't just been lying to me. She'd been manipulating her sister into becoming an unwitting accomplice, using Lyra's love and trust to make her deception more convincing. "I'm sorry you got dragged into this," I said. "I know how much you care about her." "I can't believe she would do something like this. This isn't the sister I know. Cambria's always been ambitious and sometimes selfish, but she's not cruel. She wouldn't deliberately hurt people she loves." I thought about the past 8 months, about all the elaborate lies and careful manipulations, about the way Cambria had looked me in the eye every morning and asked about my day while planning her next romantic getaway. Maybe Lyra was right that this wasn't the sister she knew, but it was definitely the wife I'd been living with. "People change," I said finally, "sometimes in ways that surprise everyone, including themselves. What am I supposed to do with her? She can't stay here indefinitely, but she's in no condition to be alone right now." "That's not my problem anymore, Lyra. I'm sorry, but I can't keep taking responsibility for Cambria's choices and their consequences." After I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out at the gray morning light filtering through the curtains. Part of me felt guilty for being so blunt with Lyra, but a larger part felt relieved. For the first time in months, someone else was dealing with Cambria's drama while I focused on my own life. My phone buzzed with a text from Arden. "Coffee, I have updates." An hour later, I was back at the morning grind, watching Arden organize what looked like a small mountain of paperwork. She seemed energized, almost cheerful, like someone who'd been working toward a goal for a long time and could finally see the finish line. "Brent's been officially terminated," she said without preamble. "Effective immediately, no severance, no references." His supervisor said it was the most clear-cut case of employee misconduct they'd seen in years. "What about the other women?" Jennifer filed a formal harassment complaint. Melissa told her husband, who's apparently been spreading the story throughout their social circle. And Rebecca... Arden's smile was sharp and satisfied. "Rebecca's article comes out in tomorrow's paper. She's calling it The Modern Predator, how one man manipulated multiple women through elaborate lies." I had to admire the comprehensiveness of it. In less than a week, Arden had systematically destroyed every aspect of Brent's comfortable life. His marriage, his job, his reputation, his financial security, all of it was gone, replaced by the kind of public humiliation that would follow him for years. What about his living situation? "He's staying at a motel on Route 9, the kind of place that rents rooms by the week and doesn't ask too many questions." She pulled up a photo on her phone showing a rundown building with a flickering neon sign. Not exactly the romantic hideaway he was probably imagining for his new life. "And your kids?" "They're handling it better than I expected. Turns out they've been aware of their father's behavior for longer than I realized. My daughter told me she stopped believing his excuses about working late when she was 12. Arden's expression softened slightly. "They're relieved, actually. They said the house feels more peaceful without him." I thought about my own house, about how quiet and calm it had been since Cambria left. There was something to be said for not having to manage someone else's emotional chaos on a daily basis. "What's Phase 5? I asked. Arden's grin turned predatory again. "Phase 5 is making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. See, Brent's pattern is to find women who are vulnerable, unhappy in their marriages, dealing with personal crises, feeling invisible or undervalued. He targets them specifically because they're easy to manipulate." She opened another folder on her laptop, revealing what looked like a comprehensive psychological profile. "I've been researching his methods, documenting his techniques, building a case study that shows exactly how he operates. Jennifer, Melissa, and Rebecca have all agreed to participate." "Participate in what?" "A warning system. We're creating a network of women who've been targeted by men like Brent, sharing information and resources to help others recognize the signs before they get pulled into these situations." It was ambitious and slightly intimidating, but I had to respect her commitment to turning her personal tragedy into something that might help others avoid the same fate. "What about Cambria?" "What about her? Is she part of your warning system, or is she still considered a threat?" Arden considered the question carefully. "That depends on what she does next. If she acknowledges what happened, takes responsibility for her choices, and commits to not repeating the pattern, then she's a victim who can help other women avoid the same trap. But if she continues to blame everyone else for her situation and refuses to accept accountability..." She didn't finish the sentence, but I could see the implication in her expression. Cambria's rehabilitation was conditional on her willingness to face the truth about her own behavior. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Lyra again, sounding even more frantic than she had that morning. Orion, you need to come over here. Cambria's gotten worse. She's talking about confronting this Brent person, making him pay for ruining her life. I think she might do something stupid. I looked at Arden, who had clearly overheard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. Her expression had gone cold and calculating. Tell Lyra you'll be right there, she said quietly. But first, call the police and give them Brent's location. If Cambria is planning to confront him, someone needs to be ready to intervene before she does something that ruins what's left of her life. You think she's dangerous? I think she's desperate, and desperate people make bad decisions. The question is whether we're going to let her make this situation worse, or whether we're going to help her find a way forward that doesn't involve more lies and manipulation. I made the call to the police, then headed toward Lyra's apartment, wondering if I was about to witness the final act of Cambria's self-destruction or the beginning of her redemption. Either way, I was ready for this chapter of my life to finally come to an end. Lyra's apartment was in chaos when I arrived. Cambria was pacing the living room like a caged animal, her hair unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes wild with the kind of manic energy that comes from too much caffeine and too little sleep. Empty wine bottles lined the coffee table, and crumpled tissues were scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. There he is, Cambria said when she saw me, her voice sharp with accusation. My loving husband, who's been plotting against me with that woman. What woman? Don't play stupid, Orion. I know you've been working with Arden Marrow. I know you two have been comparing notes and planning your revenge. What I don't understand is why you had to destroy my entire life instead of just ending our marriage. Lyra was hovering near the kitchen, looking helpless and frightened. She'd never been good with confrontation, and this version of her sister was clearly beyond her ability to handle. Nobody destroyed your life, Cambria. You did that yourself when you decided to have an affair with a married man who was lying to everyone involved. Brent loves me. The words came out as a shriek, high and desperate. He told me he was leaving his wife, that we were going to start over together. We had plans, a future. And now his phone is disconnected, and his office won't tell me where he is, and everyone is treating me like some kind of pariah. I sat down on Lyra's couch, suddenly exhausted by the whole situation. Cambria, Brent was never going to leave his wife. He's been having affairs for years, telling the same lies to multiple women, making the same promises he had no intention of keeping. You weren't special to him, you were convenient. You're lying. But there was less conviction in her voice now, a crack in the facade that suggested some part of her was beginning to accept the truth. I wish I was, but Arden has documentation going back 2 years. Hotel receipts, text messages, emails, photos. Brent has a pattern, and you fit right into it. Married woman, feeling neglected, looking for someone to make her feel special again. He probably spotted you coming from across the room. Cambria collapsed into Lyra's armchair, her manic energy suddenly depleted. But he said he loved me. He said I was different from the others. He said the same thing to Jennifer and Melissa and Rebecca and probably half a dozen other women whose names we don't even know yet. I leaned forward, trying to catch her eye. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? I'm going to find him and make him explain himself. I'm going to make him tell me the truth about what we had together. No, you're not. The voice came from the doorway, where Arden was standing with a uniformed police officer. Because Brent Marrow was arrested an hour ago for harassment and stalking, and he's currently sitting in a jail cell waiting for his arraignment. Cambria stared at Arden with undisguised hatred. You're the one who's been poisoning everyone against me. You're the one who got him fired and ruined everything. I'm the one who documented his crimes and presented the evidence to the appropriate authorities, Arden replied calmly. Just like I documented your crimes and presented that evidence to your employer. The color drained from Cambria's face. What crimes? I didn't commit any crimes. Falsifying expense reports is a crime. Using company resources for personal activities is a crime. Lying on official documents is a crime. Arden stepped into the room, and I could see the police officer positioning himself near the door. Your company's investigation found evidence of at least 12 separate instances of fraud over the past 8 months. That's impossible. Cambria stopped mid-sentence, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You never thought about it as fraud because you were so caught up in the romance of your affair that you didn't consider the legal implications of your actions, Arden continued. But charging personal expenses to your corporate credit card, claiming reimbursement for conferences you didn't attend, and using company time and resources to conduct your personal relationship, those are all forms of theft. Cambria looked around the room wildly, as if searching for an escape route or an ally who might help her argue her way out of this situation. But Lyra was staring at her with shock and disappointment. I was watching with grim satisfaction, and the police officer was simply waiting for instructions. Mrs. Vanton, the officer said quietly, I need you to come with me. Your employer has filed charges, and there's a warrant for your arrest. Arrest? Cambria's voice was barely a whisper. But I didn't mean to. I never thought. It was just a few hotel rooms and dinners. It wasn't real theft. Intent doesn't matter when it comes to fraud, Arden said. What matters is that you took money that didn't belong to you and used it for purposes that had nothing to do with your job. As the officer helped Cambria to her feet and began reading her rights, I felt something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't regret either. This was the logical conclusion of 8 months of lies and manipulation, the inevitable consequence of choices that had spiraled far beyond what anyone had originally intended. Orion, Cambria said, as the officer guided her toward the door. Please, don't let them do this to me. We were married for 23 years. That has to count for something. I looked at her standing there in handcuffs. This woman I'd loved and lived with and built a life alongside and felt mostly emptiness. Not anger, not sadness, just the hollow space where strong emotions used to be. It counted for something, I said, but you threw it away when you decided that lying to me was easier than talking to me about whatever was missing in your life. After they left, Lyra and I sat in her living room, surrounded by the debris of Cambria's breakdown, the wine bottles, the tissues, the scattered papers from whatever legal documents she'd been reviewing, all of it evidence of a life that had come completely apart in the span of a few days. What happens now? Lyra asked. Now she faces the consequences of her choices, I replied. She'll probably get probation and community service for the fraud charges, assuming she cooperates and shows remorse. The real question is whether she learns anything from this experience or whether she finds new ways to blame everyone else for her problems. And what about you? I thought about it. What about me? For the first time in months, I didn't have to worry about Cambria's lies or manage her emotional chaos or try to figure out what was real and what was manipulation. I could focus on my own life, my own future, my own happiness. I'm going to be fine, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. Arden appeared in the doorway, having finished giving her statement to the police. It's over, she said simply. Brent's in jail, Cambria's been arrested, and all the evidence has been turned over to the appropriate authorities. Justice, as they say, has been served. What about you? I asked. What happens to Arden Marrow now that her mission is complete? She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it was a genuinely happy expression. Now I get to find out who I am when I'm not married to a liar. I'm thinking of going back to school, maybe getting that teaching degree I always wanted. My kids are old enough to handle some independence, and I've got enough documentation skills to write a book about recognizing and avoiding predatory relationships. Sounds like a good plan. What about you, Orion? Any plans for your post-Cambria life? I looked around Lyra's apartment one last time, letting my eyes settle on the scattered remnants of my former wife's unraveling. It wasn't the dramatic chaos of a movie scene, no overturned furniture or broken glass, but the quieter kind of devastation, the kind created by someone whose life has slipped entirely out of their own hands. Piles of unopened mail, a few empty wine bottles, a half-finished apology letter crumpled on the counter, the faint smell of perfume layered over stale air, proof that Cambria had finally reached the end of the story she'd been writing long before I realized I was in it. And as I stood there, absorbing the evidence of her collapse, something inside me shifted. I felt lighter than I had in years. Not triumphant, not smug, just unburdened. The weight of managing someone else's deception was gone. The constant vigilance, the emotional tax of sorting truth from lies, of bracing for the next half-confession or deflection, had evaporated. So had the exhaustion of loving someone who treated that love as an inconvenience, a reminder of the person they no longer wanted to be. For the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe without guilt. I'm thinking of taking a vacation, I said, surprised by how natural the words sounded coming out of my own mouth. Somewhere warm, where nobody knows my story, somewhere I don't have to explain why my marriage ended or pretend I'm okay when I'm not. After that, maybe I'll renovate the house, take on new projects at work, figure out what I actually want instead of what I think I should want. Arden gave a small, warm smile. Sounds like a good plan, she echoed, her tone gentle but firm. Like she wasn't just agreeing, but affirming something she'd hoped I'd eventually realize. We left Lyra to sort out her sister's chaos and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. A breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the clean wood smoke scent of late autumn. The sun had begun its slow descent, brushing the sky with streaks of orange, pink, and gold. It reminded me why I'd always loved this season in New England, the quiet beauty, the feeling of change, the gentle reminder to release the fading old and make room for what comes next. "Thank you," I said as we reached our cars. Arden raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For showing me that revenge doesn't have to be about anger or hatred. Sometimes it's just about making sure people understand the real cost of their choices." She nodded thoughtfully. "The best revenge is living well," she said. "But sometimes living well looks like clarity. Sometimes it looks like consequences. And sometimes people need help understanding why the people they hurt are able to move forward while they're stuck paying the bill." I let out a breath that felt like it belonged to someone freer than the man I'd been a few hours ago. Arden got into her car, her kids' drawings fluttering in the back seat, and pulled away with a small wave. Within moments, she was gone, leaving me alone in the parking lot. The silence felt different now. No longer heavy, no longer dangerous. Just quiet. Clean. My phone buzzed. A text from Frank. "Heard through the grapevine that your situation got resolved. Want to grab a beer and celebrate your freedom?" I stared at the message for a long second, then glanced at the sunset, then at the long stretch of road leading back to my house, no longer a stage for someone else's drama. For the first time in 8 months, I had nowhere I needed to be and nothing collapsing behind me. "Rain check," I texted back. "I've got some living well to catch up on." I drove home through the gathering darkness, passing the restaurants where Cambria had conducted her affair, places we'd once celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, new jobs, passing the hotels where she had spent our money on illusions and someone else's promises, passing every fragment of the life we built together, and the fault lines that had quietly undone it. But I wasn't thinking about any of that anymore. It felt distant, like a story someone else had told me once, a cautionary tale with characters I no longer recognized. What I was thinking about was the future. For the first time in a long time, it looked like something worth anticipating instead of dreading. When I got home, the house was quiet. But it was a peaceful quiet now. Not the suffocating silence of secrets held behind walls. No hidden tensions. No feeling that I was intruding on a life that had already moved on without me. I poured myself a drink, stepped onto the porch, and watched the stars blink into existence over the town where my marriage had ended and, unexpectedly, my real life was ready to begin. The cool air felt sharp and clean in my lungs. The porch light hummed softly, steady and warm. Somewhere across town, Cambria was likely sitting in a jail cell, finally facing the consequences of 8 months of manipulation. Somewhere else, Brent was learning the hard way that a life built on deceit collapses the moment the truth shows up. And somewhere in her own quiet home, Arden was tucking her children into bed and sketching out a future that no longer required her to carry the weight of someone else's betrayals. As for me, I was exactly where I wanted to be, free, grounded, and finally clear-eyed. It had taken the collapse of everything I thought I wanted to understand what I actually needed. Sometimes it works that way. Sometimes life dismantles the structure you built because it was never meant to hold the weight of who you're becoming. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, and tonight, for the first time in almost a year, I finally believed I could.